I've put that behind me. I hardly talk about it because we've got other important things ahead of us. I think I'm looking to the future. I have not forgotten the past. I've got it at the back of my mind. I have not forgotten it.
Former Fiji Prime Minister Mahendra Chaudhry has moved on from the events that launched him into the spotlight and the man who put him there. George Speight donning a celebratory shirt to receive his presidential pardon. A 67-year-old won't be spending the rest of his retirement years behind bars after all. But many haven't forgotten the events which landed him there. 24 years ago, May 19, 2000, Speight, along with other armed men, stormed Fiji's parliament, taking then Prime Minister Mahendra Chaudhry and 35 MPs hostage.
Right, I've executed the coup. I've toppled the government. I detained their members.
For 56 days, Suva was plunged into anarchy and political turmoil as riots and looting swept the capital.
George's perspective is this: Fiji for the Fijians.
Speight was both praised
We all love Speight
and condemned.
We are looking at a very frightening scenario over here.
The coup was chalked up to ethnic tensions that boiled over when Chaudhry, the country's first elected Indo-Fijian Prime Minister, took office. Indo-Fijians, descended from labourers brought by the British, make up about 40% of Fiji's population. And this wasn't the first time ethnic tensions have boiled over. When an indigenous-led government lost the 1987 elections, current PM Sitiveni Rambuka, then a commander of the Fijian military forces, led a coup to overthrow the newly elected government. And later, another coup in 2006 saw Frank Bainimarama oust PM Lice Movono and President Josefa Iloilo, after a political crisis sparked by 3 controversial bills deepened the ethnic divide. So back to Mr. Speight. With military arms, an elite unit behind him, and the support of nationalists, Speight says he was claiming back Fiji for the Fijians in the same fashion it was taken.
You know why my ancestor, Ratu Takambo, ceded himself to Britain? You know why? It's very simple. The gun.
In exchange for the release of hostages, Speight's group demanded that they have power in choosing the next government, that the constitution be changed to exclude Indo-Fijians from government, and that all parties involved in the coup receive amnesty. International pressure mounted as countries refused to acknowledge his caretaker government and imposed sanctions. But eventually, the key demands were met under the Monikau Accord. Keeping his word, Speight released the hostages. And it always seemed as if he would walk away a free man. But he was arrested in July. Later that year, the accord deemed invalid. Speight received the death penalty.
So do you think the death penalty will be carried out against Mr. Speight?
You've got to be crazy. Of course it won't.
But with a guilty plea, his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Speight's release comes at a time when the country is looking to reckon with its past. Fiji's parliament have passed a motion to establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that would help resolve racial differences. Some are calling for Speight to participate.
Those who suffer, the trauma has remained because we have not worked through the trauma that people went through.
Is there any work to ensure that people feel safe and are safe?
Doing that will mean that we feel that there is a threat. Just being normal about everything will remove that apprehension. I think they're very safe. They have nothing to worry about from Mr. Speight.
Fiji is headed up a different way now. We've come a long way since 2000. And I think you hear of reconciliation and good spirit, hanging in the air particularly through our most important institutions. But I want to show everybody, there is nothing to be concerned about. I want to show you that Fiji is safe.
It is for the government of the day to do something about it, truth and reconciliation, how far will it go? How much can the victims of the coup expect from it? Will there be real justice? But I think we are taking a step towards it, and I hope that whatever comes out of it will be fair to all concerned.
And Lice is here with us now. She's been following the story all week. Pula Lice.
Bula vinaka toko.
What's the public mood at the moment regarding Speight's release?
Well, look, a lot of people are happy to see the man out. George Speight did represent a push for indigenous leadership some 24 odd years ago. So there are a lot of people that are happy to see him out after being in jail for so long. However, there are also a lot of people who were at the receiving end of the violence that George Speight began when he took over the government in 2000. And for those people, a closure is necessary.
Overall, what do you think the fairly muted public response means about where Fiji is at politically and in terms of race relations?
Well, I think George Speight finally coming out after 21 odd years in jail represents a closing of a chapter of sorts for Fiji's quite turbulent political history. There are a lot of people who now feel satisfied and content that he has done his time, and there's a feeling of reconciliation in the air. There is a general consensus for the need to move forward.
And speaking of moving forward, there are calls for Speight to take part in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Chaudhry also echoes these calls. Does Speight have an obligation to do so now that he's a free man?
Well, George Speight received a full presidential pardon, so he is under no obligation to do anything or say anything to anyone. However, there are calls for him to speak in front of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, Alice, it must be noted that the bill to establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission is currently making its rounds for feedback, and that bill is meant to be tabled before the end of the year. So until then, we don't really know what sort of legislative power and mandate this commission might have, and whether it might even have the legal ability to compel George Speight to appear before it.
And one of the champions of that bill is, of course, Prime Minister Rambuka. You spoke recently with him about Speight's release, and he mentioned he himself was a victim of Speight.
That's right. He says that he also wants George Speight to speak in front of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Now, for a country that has a very colorful coup culture like we do here in Fiji, the list of suspects over who might be those backers is very short. And so for the longest time, there have been allegations made that Rambuka might have had something to do with the fact that George Speight had the backing of the military's elite forces at the time. So Rambuka is hoping that George Speight will clear those allegations once and for all when he speaks to Rambuka's non-involvement in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
And staying with Prime Minister Rambuka, he also this week unveiled Fiji's first ever foreign policy white paper. It was written in a part by a former Australian diplomat, but it also stressed Fiji's non-alignment. Let's hear what the PM had to say.
We're friends to all and enemies to none, yes. And we have been non-aligned for a long time, although our policies and our assistance and aid and cooperation have been more towards the West.
Lice, what do you make of the PM's suggestion Fiji remains unaligned and of the white paper more broadly?
Look, this is Fiji's first ever foreign relations strategy, and so it provides some direction and some clues as to who Fiji will work with and the kind of values and principles that will guide the way in which they work with these partners. However, some things are clear. Rambuka's made it clear that the Pacific family, Pacific regionalism, and the Pacific Island Forum Vuvale is going to be the central part of how Fiji decides decides who it works with and what they work on together. As to the non-alignment positioning of Fiji, this is the first time that they've come out and put it in black and white that they're non-aligned. However, while he's announcing that, Ellis, he talks about leaning into their traditional partners, and we all know that what that means is the traditional partners are the democratic nations of the West. But one thing that is very clear is that Rambuka does not mince his words about the fact that Fiji's foreign relations environment is largely influenced and informed by the United States and China's geopolitical competition in the Pacific.
Lee, that's always insightful chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Malo.